All right, welcome, Benjamin Studebaker. Great to have you, man. How's it going?
I'm great. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We were just having a little conversation behind the scenes there, and I was saying that I feel a little bad because I was hoping to at least skim your book before our conversation, but I'll go back to work this weekend at Amazon. I'll be listening to it then. That's how I skim things, and then I'll know how to hone in on it, and then we'll hopefully have a more substantial conversation after that. But for now, I'd like to kind of give you the floor. But first, I want to just let everyone know that Benjamin Studebaker is one of the people who wouldn't be here if not for people in my audience or fellow travelers who keep telling me, you got to have a conversation with Benjamin Studebaker, because like Nance and I, as well as Elton and a handful of others, like we've been talking about all kinds of stuff that apparently just makes people think we need to talk to you. And so with that said, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your intellectual project and your books and kind of what you're up to.
Yeah, cool. Well, in terms of me, I'm from Indiana originally. I went to a public high school in Northwest Indiana. I did my undergrad at Warwick in the UK, my master's at University of Chicago in the States, then my PhD at Cambridge. So I'm kind of European, I guess. The British hate it when I say that, but sort of. So my book is called The Chronic Crisis of American Democracy, The Way is Shut. And it starts off with the kind of central claim that there's something really wrong with the American economy and with the global economy in general. You've got an enormous amount of capital mobility. It's really easy to move money from place to place, but workers and states are territorial. They're not as mobile. And that means that they don't have as much leverage as money does. Money goes to whichever part of the world is most hospitable to it, and states and people are constantly having to accommodate its demands. And in practice, this takes the form of lower tax rates, it takes the form of lower wages, it takes the form of weaker bargaining power for labor unions. And most of the time, capital doesn't even have to actually go away, because states take all of these measures preemptively to prevent it from going elsewhere. And in this constant competition to attract this money, you're constantly pushing down tax rates, and that means also you're eroding the quality of public services, you're eroding the quality of infrastructure, you're eroding the quality of everything, really. And the difficulty is, how do you govern this capital that's become extremely, extremely mobile? Well, the United States, it takes a lot to get the United States to do anything. You have to win an enormous number of elections in the American political system to actually get the United States committed to do anything in particular. It's very, very hard, right? And then if you want to control capital mobility worldwide, and you want to do that in a multilateral cooperative way, you have to get lots of other states on board. So you not only need to win a lot of elections all at once in the United States, you then need other governments in other parts of the world that are friendly to what you're trying to do and are willing to entertain it. And in the meantime, all of these governments are suspicious of you, because so many times American presidents have said, we want to negotiate something like, a climate, Kyoto Protocol. We want to negotiate a new trade agreement like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then a presidential election happens, there's a new president, and the new president hates the deal that was negotiated by the previous president. So there's a credibility problem for Americans, even when the American government is serious about negotiating something. And you have that to deal with on top of the fact that it's really hard to get a bunch of senators in office who are willing to vote through to ratify a treaty that you negotiate. Now, if you go, well, all right, maybe it's too hard to pool a bunch of countries together to change the rules, your other alternative is to withdraw the country from the system of international trade, to take a unilateral approach, to go protectionist and start tariffing countries that you think have tax rates that are too low or labor protections that are too weak. But if you do that, then you disrupt all of this trade that we've got going. And as we've seen during the COVID pandemic, even if you disrupt this trade just a little bit, just around the margins, people get really upset. If there's any inflation or any shortages of anything, people get really upset. So it's very difficult politically to do that. And yet, if we don't find a way to do one of these two things, either to multilaterally come together and rewrite the rules or unilaterally pull out and tear up the integration, if we can't do either of those things, we're going to stay stuck in this process where we are constantly in a race to the bottom on taxes, on public services. And this is going on all over the world. The European states are also slowly grinding down their public services. It's happening slower there because there are political impediments to it, but the same thing's going on over there. So it's not like there's a set of democratic institutions that are operating well in some other part of the world that we can just copy, and if we had them, then everything would be functional here. So the upshot of all of this is that we all kind of have a sense that our system isn't working particularly well. But we're not really willing generally to take seriously how messed up it is. So we keep trying to talk ourselves into the idea that there's a little bit of tweaking we can do around the margins that would make this system work a lot better than it does. But really, it's really badly messed up. It really isn't going to function with a few tweaks here or there. But we are so scared to touch it, because if you start thinking about changing the political system of the United States to create something that is more capable of taking action, or you start talking about manufacturing the kind of crisis that would allow you to unilaterally disrupt capital mobility around the world. These are enormous, cataclysmic things to do, and they're scary and they're frightening, and we do not want to confront those kinds of situations. And I think for this reason, we have this sense that we don't believe in this system. We have lost our confidence in it and our faith in it, and yet we are not willing to pull the trigger on creating something else. We're not willing to really take seriously what that involves. And so every time we start to think in a bit of a radical direction, we stop ourselves before we get too far.
It's amazing. So that's basically the book. You fleshing this out. This is the problem the book fleshes out.
Yeah, cool. That's the problem.
Well, I mean, I feel like I just saw a movie trailer for what I'm going to be listening to at work this weekend. So, that's cool. But now I get to speak to the director. Like, that's, well, without having seen it, I think one of the reasons people have us mentally together and wanting us to talk is because of the professional managerial class. And so I want to set up a question about that, and then probably a series of questions about that, with first saying my issue with radical rewriting of the rules or tearing up, the integration and the rhetoric of that, and the way that people come together in political spaces and advocate for such things, is that it tends to be done not just by people who are anti-democratic, which I think is fine, but I mean, I say it's fine. It's just that runs so counter to people's values. And so, it's like at a certain level, we need to dignify something in that, right? That idea that somehow we're going to be represented in these changes, whether those changes are democratic or not. But the way people tend to talk about it with their anti-democratic rhetoric comes through as anti-populist. And I also don't have any special attachment to populism, except that it's suicide to be against it. And so I take that to be basically the mode of the PMC mindset as like the representative specialists who tell you to stay in your lane. And it's like, okay, sure, you can be the specialists, more or less. Let's just, drive society, whatever. I'm just a worker. I'm an idiot. I don't know anything. But when you come out and say it, and you're actually anti-populist, and then you're saying that we need to have radical changes, it scares me, because that means that the people who would make the radical changes have a disdain for ordinary working people. And that scares me more than the clusterfuck of a terrible situation we are in right now.
Oh, they often crib from the populists as they denounce them. They go, oh, it's so terrible for someone who's running for president to suggest that his opponent, Hillary Clinton, should be imprisoned. And then a few years later, they desperately try to imprison their political opponents and say that this person is the corrupting force that's destroying the elite force that's destroying the society, and we've got to come together. We the real people have to come together to overcome him. the Biden administration uses very much a lot of populist rhetoric and has stolen a lot of the kinds of techniques that the Trump administration itself trafficked in. In terms of the PMC stuff, I think this is a really interesting topic. The reason that a lot of people on the left don't like talking about the professional class is that if you can imagine that all of the people who are employees are workers, and if you can get everybody to think in terms of I'm a worker, we're all workers, we're all in this together, that has some strategic, solidaristic potential to it. At least in theory, at least in principle.
Right.
And very understandably, when it comes to words, sometimes you're trying to accomplish something with your terms, and by using the concept of the working class in that broad, inclusive way, you can try to bring people together for a political purpose. And I have respect for that intention, right? The issue is that, in point of fact, there has been a split in the way that people behave politically that has a lot to do with whether they got a college degree. The two biggest indicators of how people in the states vote, the population density of where they're from, and whether they got a degree. Those two things matter more than anything else. We don't talk about those things very much. We prefer to talk about other kinds of things that the people who work in political strategy are more comfortable with. But this really matters. And it's mattered for a long time. You go back to 72 with McGovern, where McGovern is running this seemingly quite left-wing campaign. Everyone talks about how left-wing it is. But what people forget about is that the unions were very anti-McGovern. And McGovern gets crushed in that election because of how much he alienates the industrial working class as it still existed in 1972 in the States. An industrial working class that was not as keen on some of the social progressive stuff and not as keen as on some of the anti-Vietnam War stuff. So there was a split on foreign policy and on cultural issues, with college-educated workers valuing certain things more than they valued the overall economic cause, right? And in traditional industrial workers valuing the economic cause and maybe having, from the point of view of the progressives, conservative or reactionary stances on foreign policy and social issues. That split broke up the New Deal coalition and broke up the Democratic Party as it existed and the labor movement as it existed. And it became a leverage point that capital could push on. And capital has continuously pushed on it. And one of the ways it pushes on it is by trying to get people on the left to take up stances on social issues and foreign policy issues that are alienating to people who don't go to college, to get them focused on using terms, on using rhetoric that's alienating. Because if you can get people to view themselves as morally superior because they talk about certain social issues or foreign policy issues in a particular way, then they will hang on tight to those positions because those positions give them cultural capital. And the cost of that will be that people who don't go to college will not feel comfortable around them, because if they say the wrong thing or they put their foot in their mouth or what have you, they're going to be morally impugned for that behavior. This has been absolutely devastating to left-wing organizing of all types and forms. Anytime you put someone without a college degree in a room with someone who has a college degree, while the person with a college degree may say, I want to uplift marginalized voices, in point of fact, what will tend to happen is that the person with the college degree will try to tell the person without the degree how to talk and how to think and what words are acceptable to use. And a person without a degree who is self-respecting will not tolerate this and will leave and will quit and will not want anything to do with any organization run that way. The overwhelming bulk of left-wing organizations in the United States, the DSA, overwhelmingly college-educated people. People without degrees are not comfortable in these organizations. These organizations don't listen to them, don't include their perspectives, and insofar as they do, it's superficial and not genuine. And so we've got to talk about this, because if you want to do things like healthcare for all people, if you want affordable, reasonable housing, if you want any basic economic rights, let alone further socialist and Marxist objectives that you might have, you have got to find a way to overcome this distinction, which now is a real existing distinction, whether we want it to exist or not. And so while I'm sympathetic to the people who say we shouldn't want this distinction to exist, I agree we should not want it to exist. denying that it exists is not going to get rid of it.
Yeah, it's like so many other distinctions that we don't like that they exist. I don't like rich versus poor. I don't like white versus black. I don't like, et cetera, et cetera. But the way that most of these movements to gain some kind of recognition or rights forms is like the negation of the stereotype, the negation of the identity, even the goal of eradicating the class in the first place or the group as a category, and then of course, as Mark Fisher says in his Vampire Castle essay, or it was at some point though, then the people in the institutions institutionalize that thing and then try to fix those identities and say, no, this is actually the only people who should be speaking are X, Y, and Z people because they've been historically marginalized. And it's like, oh, but if we look at the movement, that wasn't the goal. It was never the goal. And then if it was sometimes the goal, this misses the point that these struggles are as articulated by people who are these specialists from these institutions. And I have a college degree, but of course, no one in my family does, right? And so that's part of why I'm tuned into this. I felt like the more I acclimated to this culture, the more I was severing ties or alienating myself from where I'm from. And that can only be done for so long, because I could say, well, that's Trump country, and those workers that I work with who don't care about politics, like they're ultimately saying reactionary things. It's like, no, okay. Outside of language games, though, they're good people. There's the people in my life who I knew before college are the people who have been there for me in ways that the people from college haven't been. And in fact, doing an experiment like this, I have more support from the people who don't even care about college, but at least they see that I'm doing a passion project. They get it at a certain level. They're like, oh, you wrote a book, cool. As opposed to people from college who are just like, oh shit, you had Nina Power on your stream. Or whatever. And it's just like, it's because, well, if you're willing to have conversations with somebody who's been deemed untouchable, then, well, maybe they'll be supportive behind closed doors or, on the street or at the grocery store. Hey, but of course they're very cautious because their own upward mobility is so undermined. And so, Barbara and John Ehrenreich, wrote this third essay on the concept of the PMC, where they were talking about that neoliberalization has resulted in a precaritization of, they don't say precaritization, but making more precarious the PMC, to the point that the PMC should be able to see that it has more common cause with the rest of the working class and should probably move on to more substantial agendas than this kind of shaming, virtue hoarding bullshit that they tend to do. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing that the increased precarity has actually just made the virtue hoarding more militant, right? And so
because that's all that people have left. When you go to college and you don't end up in the kind of job with the kind of resources and the kind of household structure that you envisioned when you went in, all you have left is the language distinction. That's all you've got. So of course you're going to hang on to that. And we need to have sympathy for people in this situation. These are people who did what they were told to do. They went to college to do something that should have allowed them to go into a field. They weren't able to get into that field. Now they got a ton of debt, and people are treating them like dirt because they don't make money like their parents made money, or like they envisioned that they might make money when they went to college. So of course they're going to look for some way of protecting or propping up their sense of self. And the way that they tend to do that is by hanging on to the college experience, and they do that by maintaining very, very rigorously. I may not make more money than someone who doesn't go to college, but at least I know what words to use. At least I've got that. And that becomes the small distinction. And it's very similar to the Southern white who looks at the black person as, well, at least I don't have the skin color. It's very similar to that. Or to the house slave who looks at the field slave as, well, at least I'm not out in the field. It's a small distinction that people can hang on to, but you got to sympathize with it because it's being done out of suffering and at a pain, and that pain is caused by the system itself. And it's one of the forms of pain that we want to get rid of, that we want to recognize as valid kind of suffering that occurs under this system. So I'm very sympathetic to it. I think sometimes in the critique of the professional class, people lose their sympathy for it, and it's because they conflate the rump professionals who make it with the fallen professionals who don't make it. And the way that the professional class really operates is that the rump professionals who make it create content for the fallen professionals who don't make it. They pretend that their content is for the working class, but it's really just for the fallen professionals and not for the working class as a whole. They insist that it is for the working class as a whole, and that anyone who denies this is trying to in some way undermine the left as a project, but that's not true. What is really the case is that these rump professionals have found that this is a way that they can be successful. And it's so hard now to be successful that the rump professionals, because of their desperate competition with one another, will go to great lengths to come up with anything that is serviceable. There's a bit in my book where I talk about it as kind of like they're balloonists, right? So like when you aren't in college or when you're in high school, you're on the ground with everybody, right? And on the ground, there's all sorts of horrible stuff going on. And you go, well, if I could get into a balloon and get up in the sky a little bit, I might be able to see what's going on, and maybe I could tell people on the ground what they could do, and I could help them out, right? So you go to college and you're trying to help people out, and you get, and they give you a balloon, and you start to go up in the balloon a little bit, and for a while, you can see some stuff, and you can shout things at them, and they can shout things at you, and there's conversation that goes on, and you're actually feeling like you're doing what you came there to do. But gradually what tends to happen is that you start getting higher and higher and higher up, and you can't hear as much of what is coming from the ground anymore. And they can't hear as much of what you're saying. And increasingly, when you look around, you're not even seeing what's on the ground, you're seeing the other balloons in the sky. And you're comparing your balloon to those other balloons, and you start shouting things at the people in the other balloons. And at a certain point, you have a conversation that has nothing to do with the ground anymore. But by that point, it doesn't matter. You can drift off into the sky, into retirement as a rump professional, and they can go find some other kid on the ground and give that kid a balloon and start the whole thing over again.
It was a powerful image, and yeah, it makes me think of Karl Jaspers and the idea of university, talking about the intellectuals and their little. He talks about intellectuals at the university, because of their insecurity in a sort of sense, they're like monkeys in palm trees. Every one of them has their own little palm tree, and if you start to mess anything up for the other ones, they'll all throw their coconuts at you. But I feel like your analogy goes further, right? It goes further because, like, really, they're going to shoot your balloon down is what it's going to be. They're going to be like, okay, yeah, you're mucking up the discourse here. Of course, the problem with that, going back to Jasper's idea of the university, is that the idea itself is that we are trying to approximate universal truth from our particular fields. We're trying to bring our standpoint in these fields into a dialectical discussion with other people that is trying to approximate the universal truth. And of course, it's an ideal. The entire book is about ideals, because we forget in our institutional critique that there are ideals that ultimately, if not structure these institutions, they are the legitimation narratives of these institutions, right? And so I think it would be really easy for someone to do what I would do in this case, which is to say, well, how are we any different using this discourse? And of course, I get really, I get salty. I get a little caustic online when people keep saying the same things and they don't, it's like, okay, well, this conversation keeps going around in circles. I've been trying to get the word to people on the professional and managers of capital, right? Like the professional managers of capital, or the professionals and managers. You can say it either way, and it gets you out of the class question, which is, for some reason, somewhere that it always comes, oh, well, is it really a class though? And it's like, well, I mean, I don't really know. If owning and controlling the means of production made you a class, and now ownership has been separated from control, and those are two separate things, and the people who control also have usually their retirement plans and their investment funds and everything and the bonuses tied up in the ownership, so that they actually have some partial ownership in that sense. Then what's the problem here? But setting aside the class question, because it does seem to be a stumbling block for a lot of people, I just say it's professionals and managers of capital. That's what the PMC is for me. But there's all these other things that we get stuck in. And so I got a little salty last week. Someone in the comments section said only PMCs talk about the PMC. This is like, and then they said, you're basically so PMC, you're not working class. And it's like, well, I know. I mean, I do have to work at Amazon and I've never had a secure job, but I also have a college degree. And so I am this kind of runt that you're talking about in a sort of sense. And I don't like that. And I do feel that contradiction. But I think it's missing a few things. And I'll just address one of them before I kind of turn this over to a broader conversation about some of the common myths or things that people tend to get stuck on when thinking about the PMC. And the thing is that I don't know anybody who takes the PMC concept seriously who doesn't come from the working class into the PMC and then resent it. Because now that they're there, they go, either they've lost touch with where they're from and they want to go back to where they're from, and there's a problem there because you can't, there's never any going back. Like W.E.B. Du Bois talks about that. There's like this iconic story of going back after Harvard or whatever, and the way that, oh, I'm the enlightened one of my race now. And then, everyone thinks I'm just some college prick, right? So like this is an age-old problem. But I think there's more than this saying it's just PMC on PMC hate, or that it's, I think what it's missing is that not only does, say, someone like Barbara Ehrenreich come from a father who's like blue collar, or like Catherine Liu comes from like, she doesn't come from some elite Chinese family, right? Like we have these backgrounds where it's like, no, but we care about the class issue. We bought into this idea that we're all just workers in this together. And then we realized there's something wrong with my peers and my colleagues. They keep talking to my friends and family or about them. It's usually about them. They don't ever try to speak to them. They talk about them like they're evil. They talk about them like they're idiots. They talk about them like they're scum. And they talk about them like they want to kill them in a civil war. And that's how it's been now for 7 years. Like this is the resistance rhetoric, and this is where we're at, right?
Yeah. No, that's very powerful, and that resonates. Coming from Indiana and going to the UK, I had a certain amount of that. My parents I wouldn't call them blue collar. My father was editor-in-chief of a magazine. My mother is a psychotherapist. But Indiana versus Cambridge, and public high school versus Cambridge, there is that kind of distinction in my own life. I do see some of that. Sometimes I talk about the difference between Indiana friends and European friends. Indiana friends are people who will be there for you whether you agree with them or not, and they'll do stuff for you in person. They'll help you out if you have a problem. European friends, you can have a wonderful conversation with them that you might not be able to have with your Indiana friends. But if you say something they don't like, they'll cut you out of their lives like it's nothing. And everything is very contingent on continued political alignment. And that political alignment is expressed in language, and it's not concrete. I think that the ultimate response to a lot of this is, well, if you have a strategy that cuts across this stuff and makes this distinction unnecessary, why is it that economic inequality has been continuously rising for almost 50 years now in this country? Why is it that we are nowhere close to achieving any of the major economic goals that people on the left say they are interested in achieving? And why are these people okay with that? Why are these people okay with the fact that we've got a strategy that isn't producing results, that hasn't produced results in years, and that has come alongside things getting worse? Shouldn't we be talking about why is the strategy not working? Why wouldn't we talk about why the strategy isn't working? Well, I think the main reason people don't want to talk about why the strategy isn't working is because they don't want to talk about why the strategy isn't working is because they don't want to talk about why the strategy isn't working. Well, I think the main reason people don't want to talk about why the strategy isn't working is because they don't want to talk about why the strategy isn't working is because they don't want to talk about why the strategy isn't working. Well, I think the main reason people don't want to talk about why the strategy isn't working is that in some way, shape, or form, they make money from the strategy, or they get a sense of psychological satisfaction from their participation in it. There's some kind of wage, whether it's a status wage or a money wage, that they're collecting from the left continuing to pursue a dead-end strategy. And whatever that wage is, it's tangible and real, whereas whatever they might achieve by having a strategy that might actually be able to win something, that is far away and difficult to view as immediately realistic. And so people will often take the immediate benefit, especially people who are not doing well, who are having a hard time. They will take the thing that's in front of them rather than defer gratification in the service of a strategy that can win. You have to have a certain level of psychological well-being to defer gratification. And capitalism is stripping away that psychological well-being and making it very, very hard for people to think in a strategic way.
Now, I was going to set it up for more of these, let's debunk some more myths or whatever, but I'm actually suddenly remembering, okay, so Theory Underground just put out this this volume called Underground Theory, and we've got a bunch of great authors in here, and Nance, who's here in the call with us, has a piece in here, and it's called The Walls That Separate Us From Them. Is that right, Nance? Is that what it was called?
Something like that. I don't know.
I just kind of want to put you on the spot here, because Nance was one of these guys who, you know, some kind of post-anarchist, Marxist, post-Marxist, something, who knows, trying to figure things out, who did not take the PMC concept seriously. And then he went through the course that we made freely available on my channel. Elton and I have made this available. And, you know, it's like, I don't insist that people read my piece in here that's on this concept and gets into the historical conditions that the PMC develops out of historical conditions at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, right? Like that period is a response to too much labor power that was self-aware, and something had to be done about it, right? And so I get into the express goal of developing this new mediating class that would make it so that it could create intra-class harmony, not inter, but intra, like between the ruling and the ruled. And so the PMC had to sell itself to capital as a solution to, you know, as Barbara Ehrenreich says, is cheaper than the Pinkertons, right? Like the Pinkertons come and beat some people up, but that pisses people off more. And then the workers become more militant. So, you know, best to just replace them all with Robin DiAngelo, am I right? And so that's kind of where I come at it from. And Elton has a piece in here as well, you know, where he's saying, you know, I'm PMC, born and raised, but it's not a slur, guys. It's just a structural thing. We have to understand it. What I like about Nance's piece is that it's a lot more personal, and it like opens with him talking about sitting at a table with essentially loved ones, right? And this idea of the walls that separate us from them. Nance, I'm just wondering if you might want to share your kind of maybe something about your piece and maybe this journey of going from being like, oh, it's not a thing, to being like, oh my God, it actually makes sense of something.
I think with that, in the piece, I was trying to get at like I don't know, there's like a dissonance that I feel because I grew up, you know, poor white trash, and now, due to circumstances, I'm not so much poor white trash. I am functionally, I guess, a PMC. And my loved ones, my peers, the people I spend my time with are all PMC, but there's always like this kernel of resentment at the core. Because I still carry that like a chip on my shoulder of me being this poor white trash. And yeah, when you put college educated, polite, well-to-do people in a room with uncollege educated people, we being the not educated, we feel self-conscious. We feel like we're being judged. We feel like there's this negativity that we bring with us, that maybe it's true, maybe it's not always true. And I was trying to express that in a way along with this, maybe imagine, maybe not, like real judgment that does come from the PMC, that where they do look down upon the lumpen, the workers, the uneducated, the uncouth, the people who say slurs because maybe they just don't know any better. They're good people. They work. They're productive members of society and their community, and they use a slur. I don't know. Just that tension.
Maybe they don't know any better. Here Nance is saying maybe they don't know any, or maybe it doesn't matter is also one of our other. Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't matter. And maybe it's actually one of the things that bonds them to their community, right? This transgression, it is important because for the lowbrow people, that type of transgression is what is acceptable. And for the PMC, there's other types of transgression, or maybe it's not so much transgression, but it's like symbolic cleansing, like where we have all these rituals where it's like, oh yeah, we are the good, the worthy, the deserving, the polite liberals. Yeah, just it's interesting that there is like a tangible thing that seems to separate us, and it works, I think, at the level of ideology. And we don't want to talk about it. It's like the elephant in the room that everyone wants to ignore and kind of continue on. And it like we do this game where oh yeah, I'm a leftist and yeah, fuck all, everything sucks, but I'm going to have to go vote for the Democrat once again because there are no other options. Like that's ultimately where a lot of people wind up. And it sucks the fact that there are no other options. Maybe it's not necessarily true, but we sure do spend a lot of time pretending that it's true. And the PMC, and not to assign agency or intention, but the PMC does seem to profit off of it, or at least maintain their relative comfort. And it's not comfort because they are largely precarious as well. But from my perspective as poor white trash, they sure do look a lot more comfortable. Yeah, I don't know. It's really complex, and we don't spend enough time talking about it, I think.
Yeah, and because we don't talk about it, we experience the political consequences of it. And when it bites us, we just rage about it, about the fact that we're losing, about the fact that things aren't going on. We either deny that we're losing or we rage about the fact that we're losing and blame other people. And neither of these responses gets us any closer to winning anything. And over the years, I really, really am wondering how many people actually care about winning anything or making anything actually any better. How many people are just happy to talk and happy to be right and happy to have a critique that seems true, that their friends are impressed by? And for how many people is that good enough? Adorno talks about the critique of reification. When you say, well, this concept is just an abstraction and we shouldn't treat it like it's real, this is just something that's used to split and divide people. You can get fat and happy if you stop at that point and go, oh, look at me, I see through these things. I'm smart. I see through these things and other people don't. But if that's as far as it goes, if it doesn't then lead you to act, to actually change the material situation that gives rise to the concept, then you don't actually overcome that situation and you don't actually overcome that concept, because challenging the concept ideationally doesn't change the material situation that produced it. The reason we have the concept of the PMC is that we have an economic situation that gives rise to that concept. We have a political situation that gives rise to it. That's why we have it. You could say, I don't think we should have it. I think it's bad. But just like when you would talk about, say, a concept like race, there are still reasons why race as a concept has come into existence, and you have to deal with those reasons ultimately to get rid of the concept. You can't just get rid of the concept by telling everybody not to use it and shaming people who do use it. You've got to change the situation that gives rise to the concept. And when people are just screaming at whoever it is that they think is responsible for the terms, they're not dealing in any way with the material situation, with the economy. And it makes me wonder, do they really care about that situation? Or do they have the psychological resources to care about it? And if they don't have the psychological resources to care about the economy, how do we generate those resources? What can we do to give people, at least for windows of time, enough security so that they can talk about these things? And this is why, for instance, a lot of people recently have turned against a lot of economic rights. They argue they're just palliative, and really you got to get into revolution. But if you don't make sure that people have certain economic rights, then they're not going to have the psychological resources that are necessary to engage constructively with a revolutionary project, if that's your final aim. You have to get people in a situation where they have time and energy to think about their situation calmly and reasonably if you want them to do something useful.
Yeah, that's my in, and this is my book, Timenergy: Why You Have No Time or Energy. And the basic idea of that is that I'm trying to work between and beyond Marx and Heidegger. And the Heidegger aspect of it is to say that time is not some linear, ongoing, forever thing. It is bound to finitude. It is charged with value only because it has death and the forever, like not yet, kind of on the horizon. And there's that precarity and that uncertainty. And so the thing that comes before, and then of course I do this sort of like existential analysis that he does in Being in Time, which is to say that like the thing that comes before is the precondition for labor power, is the thing that unifies time and energy in our life worlds, right? And so that is to say, we need large energy infused repeatable blocks of time in our weeks, throughout our years. And without those large energy infused repeatable blocks of time being reliable and something you can bank on, being something you can invest, being something you can sacrifice towards nonprofit or job-centric goals, there's nothing but garbage time, nothing but exhaustion, nothing except for a sort of frantic, restless kind of energy that cannot be harnessed and nowadays gets diagnosed in a variety of ways. But the fact is that is a symptom of your life's purpose not being discovered, or even if it was discovered, now it's being frustrated because you don't have the precondition for being able to do it. And the precondition for being able to do things in this sort of sustained way that would cultivate the ground for a real epic life, those things are all foreclosed because of the reduction of time energy into labor power when it's put on the market, right? And so like, as a concept, it's meant to throw a wrench in a lot of different discourses, but it's also meant to make sense of why organizing projects fail, and it's also meant to make sense of why we're so frustrated. And it's amazing that you actually kind of touched on a phenomenon that I call something in this book, but you were talking about it as when workers are being told they need to believe or say or toe some line, and then they get you said if they're self-respecting, they'll walk out, right? And it's like you're quoting me almost, right? Because I talk about that in the chapter on time energy fragility, and I say that most of what D'Angelo is calling white fragility is more like time energy fragility. This is the fact that people do not have the time energy to be able to actually get to the bottom of these discourses and understand the nuances and constitutive contradictions in the fields that these experts are speaking from. And so it's like, okay, well, I can take you at your word when you redefine racism to be power plus privilege and, the structures that, well, okay, you're going to bring in statistics now. Okay, you're gaslighting me. We're talking about here and now in this situation, and you're telling me you're evoking all these abstractions, and you're telling me how the last couple hundred years of this discourse has gone can be summarized into your PowerPoint presentation. And if I disagree with you, then I'm going to be in trouble at work. Like, I'm at work. I have to be here, right? Because that's the whole thing about D'Angelo. This isn't some self-elected thing either. This is people in their actual workspaces, right? So this is the heart of my project, and the fact that you've touched on it in your own sort of ways is well, it tells me that those people who are recommending that we meet were onto something. And so first of all, I'm really excited to read your book to skim it this weekend. And I guess with the last, 10 minutes we have here, what do we want to do here? Do you have some more things you would like to say about the book, about the PMC, or Nance, if you have any questions that you wanted to ask? Pretty much, we're in sort of close out, but we still have time to ask a question or say something.
Yeah, for sure. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to take them. In terms of the book, I think that kind of the function of the book is to move you from one mood to another. A lot of people, I think, 10 or 15 years ago had a kind of hope attitude about the American political system, that, you could get some change if you elected the right guy, whether it was Obama or Trump or Bernie Sanders, some kind of hope narrative.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, it moved into fear. People gave up on the idea that whoever it is that they thought could solve the problems could solve them, but they remained convinced that their enemies' hope was well-founded. And so even though they no longer believed that their guy could do it, they feared that somebody else's guy could do something they wouldn't like. And that's the kind of last gasp of that naive hope that they started with. It manifests as fear that somebody else might actually be able to get this system to work in a way that they don't like. And that becomes a disciplinary tool to get them to continue to give their time and energy to it. The American political system is very vampiric. It needs a certain amount of time and energy. And when you have a large group of people who are recognizing that this system is not servicing them, it goes to great lengths. There's an enormous amount of money that is deployed in finding ways to squeeze a little bit of time and energy out of the people who are trying to disengage. And so in the back half of the book, there's a lot of pivoting into how do people try to escape from this system, and how does the system come and find them in the enclaves and holes where they go to get away from it. And it drags them back in, and it finds ways to squeeze even more time and energy out of them as they try to get away. And in this sense, American democracy becomes like a vampire sucking on the blood of victims who know that they are being sucked dry, but are unable to get away from it. And I think that this quality to American democracy is really under-discussed and under-theorized, because so much of the time when people are talking about American democracy, they're trying to get people to do something with it. They're trying to get people to engage in it in some way, shape, or form. And what I really want to get people to do by the end of this book is to join me in a kind of positive, productive despair about the American political system, to get to a point where we're not just looking for some easy fix, and where we're not scared of the other side, but we're really able to see this thing as the time and energy suck that it is, and then to, not to then try to run away from it, but to then get creative and to think about what would meaningful political action look like given this system, given the way that it operates, given how difficult it is to get rid of it, and how entrenched it is. What would that look like? And I think we have to kind of get creative and start to think in a fresh way. And I think the only way we can get there is to go into a deep, deep despair about the entire American political project as it currently exists.
Well, we're at least halfway there. Yeah, Nance.
I like that a lot. I like using I don't want to say pessimism, but using, I do think of it as like a realism where things are really all that bad. And I like using that as an impetus for hope in something, for hope for hope itself, I guess. And it's kind of interesting that maybe the meta arc of the conversation, we started out this morning questioning the idea of organizing, and here we are towards the end of the day. And it comes back to that question. And again, it puts the ball in our court. Like, things really are that bad. You're not going to get the change you want to see by voting for the lesser evil candidate. You have to adopt a realistic view. America really does run on human sacrifice. And I like that. I like that message, but not to bring people down into this doomer point of view, but actually to bring people into like this radical position of like, there is something that can be done. We just haven't come up with it yet. And that's why it hasn't worked. Let's stop trying all the old things that failed over and over and over again. Let's try something new. And of course that necessitates organizing and theorizing to come up with that new thing. But I would rather have something new than the same old failures.
Yeah, there are so many people who are still caught in trying to find the point in history when things could have been different, and trying to get back to that point, whether it's the post-war era, or it's 1917 in Russia, or it's 1848 or 1789 or 1776. There's this quest for the moment where you could have done things a little bit differently, and maybe we'd be in the good version of modernity that we were supposed to have that somehow slipped our grasp. And I think we've got to get away from that. In this respect, the left has become very return-oriented and very much like the right in this constant quest for the right moment. The right might do it with, the Middle Ages, but the left is doing it with different moments in modernity when the left thinks it could have done better, or should have done better, or might have done better if not for some contingent things. And we've got to completely get past that. To a very large degree, we've been continuing to do 20th century political tactics in a context where those tactics do not work. And I fully agree that we got to invent new stuff. It should not mean a kind of negative despair where you give up, you try to hide. Because for one, if you give up and try to hide, they will find you. They will get you in the enclaves where you hide. You can go and just get really into anime. They'll politicize that. You can go and get, really into images of the future, and Elon Musk, they'll politicize that too. They have. They'll politicize any place you try to go. You can, get really absorbed in a family that you try to build, or a household, or a commune you try to make. Politics will get you there. It will get you anywhere you try to go. It's that hiding in what you think is this public-private distinction, this liberal distinction that you think will somehow allow you to carve out some other place. Capitalism is operating by getting into and commodifying every aspect of human life. There is nowhere you can go to get away from it. It is going for more and more mobility, more and more deterritorialization. It will get you anywhere you go. So we've got to come up with something else, because there's no getting out of this.
It's kind of like every single one of the things that we had up on the whiteboard earlier today, which is still up on the whiteboard, though you won't be able to see it very well, I'm sure. All of these realms, because part of the theme is like, this is New Year's, and so we have this motivation to like make resolutions and change our lives and everything like that. But what would it be to be a whole person? Or like, of course I don't have like some nostalgic idea that we were whole and then we broke. No, but like to be a person, not just to be like an intellectual or a David Goggins or what's the, some person who's just all about mental health. Like, the guy's name is escaping me, but he's the guy.
Is it
Gabor
Mate?
Gabor Mate. That's exactly who I'm thinking of. It's like, you got Gabor Mate, you've got the intellectual, like fucking Lacan or something, and then you've got the physical guy who's like David Goggins. It's like each one of them has taken on a truly difficult task, and they've maxed it out, and they've gone all the way with it, and they've proven themselves in that sphere. But as human beings, like, we want to be able to have our mental health and be intellectual and have physical fitness and health and practice musical instruments and play with other people and do theater. And of course, at this point, people are going to say, oh, and people don't take it seriously. This is possible. This is not insane. Human beings have always been able to be all of these things. Always have been able to be all of these things. Now, of course, we're more sophisticated than we used to be. We can do things with weight and strength training that we didn't used to be able to do. And we can also do things with intellectual challenges that didn't used to exist. And of course, the fields and the sciences are so much more complicated than they used to be, and so much more specialization is actually required. But to be able to be multilingual, and to be able to actually have time to go meditate, and to be able to actually like be in therapeutic spaces and not have that take over your entire life, so that that's your entire community, which is toxic, or having the physical fitness or the intellectual shit take over your entire life so that you're completely disjointed and not able to do these other things. Like, that's ultimately what the theme of today has been all about. And you talking about the commodification of everything ruining everything. Well, mental health and therapeutic spaces, nurture, being commodified and turned into this thing that's going to take over your life. Oh, you had an episode. You now you're in outpatient care. Guess what? You're not working on any of these other things. They just have you working on, oh, let's do a check-in now. Let's talk about how are you doing today? And let's have you focus more on the self-referentiality. Come on, let's just do that more and more and more. And it's like, okay, but what about the other parts about being a human? Are you helping people actually achieve those things? No. It's because each one of these things has been turned into an industry. I have presence right here, which could be meditation, it could be yoga. It's a lifestyle. Each one of these becomes a lifestyle that is sold to us through an industry. And the idea is that this is something you do outside of work. But you can only do one of these things outside of work. You know how much money it costs me to do jiu-jitsu? And it's like a big chunk of my paycheck. And I'm like, well, what if I also want to be practicing the fucking piano? Well, guess what? That's going to take just as much of my paycheck, because all of them, the cost is based on this lifestyle where this takes over your existence outside of work. And that's, to me, like part of the reason that we're fucked, in a very serious sense, is that these things that should be something we engage in autonomously or cooperatively, should be something that comes organically out of communities, is instead being sold to us as a lifestyle instead of something that we engage with outside of heteronomous labor, which could be to some extent automated to free us up to be able to go do these things if work was redistributed, if society was restructured. And so it's like, in a sort of sense, no, I have not given up hope, but when I'm having conversations with people and they think that, oh, it's just Trump, it's just Biden, it's Biden. We got to get him out of office. It's the Democrats, it's the Republicans, it's the Democrats. It's just like, okay, I have a Democrat side of my family. I have a Republican side of my family. The Republican side of the family has totally bought into petty bourgeois rhetoric. The Democrat side of the family has totally bought into PMC rhetoric of centering and representation and civility but of course not with the uncivil. We cannot be, and so this, like, loving people who are so caught up in these two sides, and then realizing that 50% of the American population, mostly working class, isn't on either of those sides and is just working people who would prefer to run the other direction if you wanted to talk either of these sides. That to me is everything. That to me is what everything comes down to. And it's what we ultimately got to here. And so thank you so much for being here. I'm going to let you guys say your closing thoughts. I know I'm giving you another couple minutes to say your closing thoughts. And I do want you, in your closing thoughts there, Benjamin, to address my wife's question in the chat, which was, she wants to know more about psychological resources, so like what you actually mean by that. So maybe in your closing thoughts, you can say something about that. I also just wanted to say that earlier in the stream, we were waiting for Ashley Frowley, and the reason that she wasn't there was because she is not in Athens, Greece right now, like I thought. She's actually with family for the holidays, and it's due to failure, miscommunication on my part. And so I just wanted to let everybody in the stream know that I fucked up, because I said next Thursday when I meant this Thursday. So she literally just was just like, oh yeah, cool, we'll do this next Thursday. Yeah, so next Thursday, for people who are just learning English, I know I've got plenty of you watching this. Next Thursday means if Thursday's in 3 days from now and you say next Thursday, you mean the following week. You have to say this Thursday, and I must have slipped because I know that. But anyway, so I just wanted to say it was not Ashley's fault. She wanted to be here, and she'll be here in 2 weeks when we do it again. So thank you everybody so much. It'll go Nance and then Benjamin. We'll let you have the last word, and then we'll close this thing out.
Yeah, I am very much looking forward to getting in your book. I think the balance between like being a doomer and being realistically hopeful. I love it when people can pull that off. And it seems like you have managed to pull that off. And I'm looking forward to reading it because, yeah, like we're at that point where it feels like we're at a standstill. We've been at a standstill as far as people who care about improving their material conditions and the material conditions of others. Nothing has improved. And in fact, almost everything has gotten worse. And we need to have serious grown-up conversations about that. And it just seems like people aren't. People are just doing the influencer thing and patting themselves on the back. And that sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, people are blaming particular individuals or groups, or whether they're foreign groups, whether they're particular politicians, for all of the misery that this system causes. And of course, in democracy, if you can be made to blame one particular person, then you can vote that person out, and that will give you an ersatz of relief that will last you, a little bit psychologically, but it won't actually solve any of the core problems. And one of the strengths of democracy is that its capacity to just pass blame back and forth among different individuals or parties without ever really getting at what's wrong. That's part of what makes democracy such a powerful system politically, but also so inept and inert in terms of a vehicle for delivering change. In answer to the question from your wife, I think there are really 5 sources of despair. I like to call them the 5 A's. Right. So you got alienation, which is, you are in a role, but you can't actualize your capacities within that role. So you have a role, but it's the wrong role for you, or it's too narrow a role that doesn't allow you to develop all the different aspects of being human. You've got anomie, which is the lack of a role, not having anything to do, being completely locked out of any kind of meaningful thing to do, which I think is in many regards at least as bad, if not worse. Then you've got atomization, being in a role that might be satisfying, but alienates you socially from people to the point where you're lonely and you don't have enough human connection. You might like what you're doing, you might get something out of what you're doing, but you're cut off from other people. And then anxiety, this concern that you might lose whatever it is that you have that is good, that it might go away, that it might disappear, that if you don't do certain things, they might take it from you. So even if you have something that doesn't do those first 3 things, you've got to deal with that 4th one. And then absurdity, the feeling that the whole system doesn't care about any of those 4 other A's, that nobody cares, that nothing is responsive to it, that all of politics and all of public discussions about other unrelated claptrap. Those 5 A's, I think, are the things that are driving people psychologically nuts. And to deal with each of those things, that would be what it would require to give ourselves psychological resources. Of course, each one is an impediment to the others. Each one, to varying extents, obstructs the others. I tend to focus on the politics, and so I tend to focus on that absurdity problem, and thinking that if we could in some way unstick the politics, then we could start to address the other 4. But the trouble that we've been running into is that people who are caught in the other 4 are not able to be politically strategic, and we need them, or we seem to need them, to be able to reopen politics. So I for that reason, my heart just goes out to all of the people who are suffering. We got to try to find a way to do politics together. We got to try to find a way. And I know it's really hard. And I know it's really, really frickin' stressful. We got to find a way. And so I wrote this book to try to help. I know it's just a book. It's not enough. I'm going to keep trying to write stuff that hopefully will help somebody think about it. That's all I know how to do.
Thank you.
Thinking is super uncool, and that's why you should do it. It's just like almost anything that's like cool anymore. It just sucks. And I think that's like what the underground movement has always been about, is just like seeing what's in the mainstream, being like it ain't there, and kind of like cobbling something together, and yeah, it's a little mismatched, but that's like its beauty.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, where workers with earbuds can find genuine liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
We bring primary texts from leading lights of diverse fields to bear on topical issues and works popular in our current world. Theory Underground is a publishing house as well as lecture course and social media platform.
You've been reading Underground Theory.
Yes.
And
amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Jesus Christ.
Seriously.
This is a little experiment in what I, David McKerracher, can pull off without relying on the academy or the algorithmic dictates of the attention economy.
Usually a good edited collection has good essays, but you only want to read a few. Every essay makes me want to read the other essays because you have a vision. Everyone that you invited for a reason. You weren't some fake publicist who's like, how's so-and-so's a new book? Have them on your show. No, you only talk to people because you've read shit by them that you've thought about, that you think has value, even if you disagree. So I think that's what's amazing.
I believe that I am, like so many others, pioneering a future in which educators can form learning webs that will make learning as a way of life enjoyable and emancipatory. However, before these tools become accessible, they have to be experimented with. That's why I built my own website and app using nothing more than my own saved wages, 5 patrons, and some small classes of students over the last year. Of course, I also have had my wife Anne's moral support and help with accounting so that I don't get in trouble with the IRS or whatever. In less than a year, Theory Underground has already put out 8 courses, 2 books, one, my book, Timenergy, and the other, Underground Theory, which has over 30 contributors, including works written by students at Theory Underground, some of my fellow travelers, and colleagues in the broader universe of Underground Theory. Beyond the books and courses, though, you will also find interviews, reading exegetical reaction sessions, and live weekly events for working-class autodidacts, independent researchers, and renegade academics. These include a variety of clubs and cohorts that meet on a weekly or monthly basis. If you want to get involved, there are 4 main subscription levels.
Think of it like a gym membership, but for your mind.
The point is to make learning, practice, and theoretical comprehension a way of life. Support at this stage of the operation is more crucial than ever because my savings were used up over the last year of getting this established. If I can triple my subscribers in the next 2 months, I can quit my gig at Amazon and focus on this work full time. All I need is a few more people at each of the levels or a couple big time patrons who just want to see it happen. Right now I am doing a patron and site subscriber drive, so excuse the commercial. But if you end up really liking what goes on at this channel, consider signing up soon. If you cannot afford it, but want to get involved with some of the stuff behind the paywall, I have made a financial aid scholarship you can sign up for here in the description. Quick side note, some people ask about the profit motive. At this point, I have not actually made a return on any of my investment in terms of the amount of time, energy that I put into things, the amount of savings I've actually put into things, the opportunity cost of the work that I'm doing as opposed to the other kinds of things that I could be doing for money. But more importantly, I don't actually make enough to pay for my cost of living. The goal is to make enough for my cost of living, and then once that is achieved, everything over that amount is going to go towards expanding the operation to the point where I can hire Michael Downs, aka Mikey of The Dangerous Maybe, to be a full-time researcher and part-time teacher at Theory Underground. All right, so with that aside, I just want to say also, if you are a worker with earbuds, what's up? I see you. I work at Amazon part-time and everything I do is for my past self who used to work there full-time. Most workers with earbuds couldn't care less about theory, but I do believe a working-class intellectual revolution could grow out of the underground theory scene. My hope is that what I have built here will contribute to making the scene something more than just a scene, and you into something more than just a scene kid. We're trying to make this into a real intellectual milieu capable of leading a way forward beyond the imminent crises facing humanity. But for that, we need thinking now more than ever.
Start thinking.
I hope that you either will or have enjoyed the program, and also make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and leave this playing in the background all the time while you're doing other things.
Playing long-form Theory Underground content in the background while you do things has, in the near future, been scientifically proven to emancipate minds from the functional illiteracy imposed on workers by the structural stultification of time energy. This is achieved by reterritorializing circumspective concern.
Also, to some degree, it is for the algorithm.
Think of it like a gym membership for your mind!
Just want to make a quick shout out here at the end to my patrons over at Patreon. I set the Patreon up like a week and a half ago because the fact is not everybody wants to be a subscriber at my website. Not everybody wants to take courses at the website. And so if people who are looking to support in some other way, Patreon is kind of a tried and true route, and some people really prefer it. And so to those who are becoming patrons at my Patreon, thank you so much. If I can get up to $500 per month between people over at my website and people over at the Patreon and people over at the Substack, collectively, I will be able to quit the job at Amazon and do this full time. And so to the people who just started trying to make that possible over at Patreon, special shout out to Alexander, Neil, Darian Large, and Nikolai. You guys are really helping make the difference. Really appreciate it. And to anybody who becomes a subscriber or a patron here in the next month, I just want to say you get a free copy of my new book, Time Energy, Why You Have No Time or Energy. And you really incentivized me to get the audio recording of this finished, which I've been working on. So thank you. Take care, everybody.